Well, with more, we're now joined by our political panel. Susan Smith is principal with Blue Sky Strategy Group. Tim Powers, the chairman of SUMA Strategies, and Anne McGrath is the national director for the NDP. Hello to the three of you.
Hello.
Hello.
So, first question, was it a mistake for Justin Trudeau to introduce this 3-year pause in a carbon tax for home oil heating? Because in many ways it looks like he's opened up a Pandora's box in terms of the criticism and the asks that he's now getting from so many quarters of the country.
Well, the reason he was getting asks and the reason the Prime Minister brought in the rebate on home heating oil is because of affordability. And he was hearing from people all over the country. And in particular, the people who'd been hit with the home heating oil bill, which was 2 to 4 times more expensive and 2 to 4 times more polluting. So he listened. I think the reality is he was damned if he did and he was damned if he didn't. The opposition was up every day screaming about affordability. Pierre Poilievre says, axe the tax, that's his thing. The Prime Minister said we're going to pause the carbon price for families that are hardest hit and also pause it specifically on the highest polluting fuel for home heating. And he was responding to concerns of ordinary Canadians at the kitchen table. So again, damned if he does and damned if he doesn't. I think the bottom line is for the families who are able to better afford their home heating and all of the rest of the families in the country who have the chance to access heat pumps, it was the right way to go. A bit clunky, but I think bottom line was trying to help people who needed help.
Okay, that's what you say the bottom line is. What do you say, Tim?
Well, clunky is a polite way of describing a car crash. And the car didn't need to crash in some ways. Look, the notion of regional variance in policy has been with us since Confederation. And that, on the issue of regional policy variance, that's fine, but they should have started that way. Because coming to this perspective now, after a ton of political pressure from within their own party, from the 4 Atlantic premiers, from numerous groups in the region, does look like it's a bit of a craven move by the Prime Minister to address that public pressure as polls in Atlantic Canada show them in decline. Probably good policy because it should have been there in the beginning. We don't know about the political outcomes. What are the Liberals trying to do here? Well, in every election over the last 20 years, except actually probably, it's 30 years ago when Mr. Chrétien had the EI changes, the Liberals have done really well in Atlantic Canada. That is the base of this party, though, in terms of how it goes from east to west. Does this help address the slide? We won't know that until election time, but this was about trying to address this slide while dealing with real challenges of affordability that they should have conceived from the outset.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think? A mistake to have done this?
I think it's a big mistake. I think that it undermines the key policy plank that this government has been all about from 2015. Like they are the climate change government, and carbon pricing was a big part of that, and I think they've undermined their entire policy platform and their whole raison d'etre in many ways as a government. I think it does look like it was responding to political pressures around poll numbers and seats and those kinds of things, and even if Goody Hutchings hadn't come out and said, if you want things like this, you should elect more Liberals, you people in Alberta and Saskatchewan and Manitoba. But even if she hadn't said that, it was so obviously responding to incredible pressure from the Atlantic MPs. And one way that I think that is that they didn't signal it in any way. There was no preconditioning whatsoever, and they didn't seem prepared for the response that they got. So, and normally if you're going to do something that's that potentially problematic, you will have stress tested it a bit. You will have given people a heads up, you will have started to lay the groundwork, and you will have responses to the predictable questions.
Yeah, and I think that's a big one, the fact that they were struggling for a coherent and consistent response to the criticisms that people were coming out. But, was there any way to make this more fair? I hear what you're saying about undermining.
Yes, there was.
Okay.
There was. I mean, our proposal, which we have been out on for quite some time now, which is to take the GST off all home heating. I think that's a good policy response. We've also talked about taxing the windfall profits of the big oil and gas companies. That's money that you could put into things like heat pumps and other home heating issues. And I think that it's a problem that it is so clearly just for one region of the country. No matter what people say, it was directed at the Atlantic. Fair enough, they had an issue there and it was a problem, but I think that coming out with a policy shift that's that big, that is clearly designed for one particular region of the country and is clearly designed to address plunging poll numbers, it's problematic.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Susan? Any way to have made it fair? Because, to Anne's point, this is, at the end of the day, being seen to benefit Atlantic Canadians more than anyone else.
Well, I think that what the numbers show is that disproportionately Atlantic Canadians are on home heating oil because they don't have access to natural gas and other things. They don't have another choice. So that's why there are so many people on home heating oil. There are people in the rest of the country who also have that same pause applied to them, but in some of those cases they have the choice to do natural gas. Look, as I said before, it's an affordability issue. It was clunky. The bottom line is you have to help people who really need help to afford to heat their homes in the wintertime. Sorry, every other province that is signed on to the Climate Accord has people have the ability to access heat pump rebates and other things. So that is fair across the country. It's fair if you're on home heating oil, if you're on natural gas, you're polluting less, your costs are less. And so it all shakes out in the wash. As Tim points out, we aren't going to know till 2 years from now. And I think the bottom line for people is, can they afford to pay their bills right at this moment in time? And come election, it won't matter if it was who brought it in or who didn't bring it in. And Poilievre wants everybody to talk about that in 2 years from now. It was an issue today for people. And so the Trudeau government did something about it.
Except it's more acute today. That is true. But the fact that 30% of Atlantic Canadians have been heating their homes with home heating oil didn't start yesterday or the day it was announced. That's been the case for a very long time, and at the case of the inception of these particular programs. So for the Prime Minister to wrap it in, I'm doing so good for these people. Now, you knew this in the beginning. You should have had a regional approach to these things. But to your question to Anne, which I think I just want to add to it, are there other things they could have done? They could have perhaps, to have equality and fairness across the board, and different opposition parties have argued this, could have put a 1-year pause on collecting carbon tax revenues. There are things they could have done if they truly wanted fairness and parity around all of this. What is fascinating for me, and I agree fully with Anne on this, is this the beginning of the end, despite the fact that the Prime Minister says that it isn't? He had every right to bring this policy forward. He had every right to push it and make it a legacy item. You diminish your credibility significantly, not only with the voters you're trying to appease, but with those who've been with you for a long time, when you say this, I'm going to be the climate Prime Minister, and you back away from your central policy. Start to back away from
Yeah, but I don't think he's backed away fundamentally on it. There's still a tax on the heavy emitters. There's still a point. The point is to try and incent behavioral change, and that hasn't changed fundamentally. It's incenting behavioral change for Atlantic Canadians to convert to heat pumps. The goal is to reduce climate. You couldn't factor in the costs that were going to come about as a result of a pandemic and everything else. There are regions of the country that have been hurt harder than others, but the reality is it's the home heating oil. It's a heavy pollution emitter itself, and it reduces consumption.
Okay, but without a doubt, we're seeing a hit on the Prime Minister here, right? I mean, the Liberal numbers are bleeding, including Atlantic Canada, and when the pollsters talk about it, they say, it's very much tied into leadership. So does this put added pressure on Trudeau to consider stepping aside? Because we did hear from a Liberal senator giving an interview saying, perhaps it's by February there should be a walk in the snow for Justin Trudeau as there was for his father. What type of pressure does this create on Trudeau and his leadership? Tim, I'll get you to start that one.
Well, I don't know if it's just this one policy, but look, whether you're Justin Trudeau or Pierre Poilievre, Stephen Harper, if you're going to be good at what you do, and the Prime Minister has been good because he's had 3 wins and he's been over 8 years, you do have to constantly assess where do you stand and can you win again. And I think he's doing that assessment. He may say he's not, and all leaders will say they're not until they actually are. Of course he's doing that assessment. Is there more pressure now? Perhaps. There's probably more caucus pressure than there has ever been. He's probably bought some time with his caucus for the moment, but I think come January, February, if he has decided that he hasn't decided, people will be looking for direction on where he's going to go. So yeah, the pressure is probably the most intense it has ever been for him to do some serious reflection on his leadership.
And what do you say to that?
Well, he's been saying for some time now that he has decided, and I actually take him at his word on that. I think he has decided, and he's planning to run again. That doesn't mean that the pressure isn't intensifying for a change. I'm not sure if he is going to respond to that or not, because I don't see many alternatives, to be honest.
Okay, I'm going to let you answer that, but before we get to that, I do want to play a clip for all of you, because Trudeau was asked about Senator Percy Down. Take a listen to what he had to say to that.
He's calling on you to step down.
Sorry, who's that?
Senator Down, a former
Percy
staffer
Down?
for Jean Chrétien. Percy
yeah.
Down.
How's he doing?
Who wants you to quit?
Oh, well, listen, I wish him all the best in the work that he's doing. Merci beaucoup tout le monde.
Okay, so that is how he answered that criticism. Do you think this is creating pressure, though, for the Prime Minister to reconsider whether or not he needs to leave as leader?
I think the Prime Minister is very funny there, basically conveying, who is that you're talking about? Not too sure, i.e. that's not someone I talk to every day, so it's clearly a speculative piece all on his own. I have lived through the days of Martin Chrétien Liberal Party being rent at the seams. There were, Tim, you lived through the Stockwell Day, Preston Manning, others, parties being rent at the seams. I don't see that in the Liberal Party. I think the Prime Minister signaled he's running again. If and when he decides he's going to go, he will decide that on his own. There is no one pushing him out the door.
Okay, well, we're watching the numbers without the doubt. A lot of people are watching the numbers, so we will convene and talk about that again. But for now, Susan, Tim, and Anne, thank you very much for the time.
Thank you.